Okie dokie. Welcome to day 15 of the Red Letter Revolution. And we're going to be reading from Matthew 24, 1 to 31. And unlike the past couple days where I sounded very excited about reading this, these passages, which are under the heading Signs of the End of Times, or the End Times, I'm not super excited to get into. Not because I think that it's the end times in the way that some of you may have been taught in the past. I, for one, grew up being taught that the world was going to end by the year 2000. That's probably why I had so much troubles in 1999, where I had challenge with the church I was a part of and all sorts of other things. It was a strange time, 2000. And here we are, 2024, almost 2025, still here. I know all my life people have been saying it's the end. And maybe it is the end. I don't know. What I do know is that what I get out of these teachings very often is that it is kind of like a map of the human heart and of human consciousness and how humans tend to relate. And the gift of the scriptures, the timelessness of the scriptures, is that it does show us how we get sometimes when we're stuck in survival mode and going against one another. And so I could see how people could, if people haven't changed, which I'm not sure, I know the lifetime I've been living in, but maybe people have been this way all along. And so when they read these scriptures, they probably thought, hey, it's the end. Because I can tell you, if you listen to what this is about to say, it sounds like we're at the end right now. So who knows? I'm going to read it. It's from Matthew 24, 1 to 31. We'll have a little bit of words afterwards, and then we'll reflect. So here we go. Matthew 24, 1 to 31. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age." And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he or she or the one who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them who are on the housetop not go down to take anything out of their house. And let the one who is in the field not go back to get their clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world, until this time, no, nor shall ever be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here's the Christ,' or 'there,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say, 'Look, he is in the desert,' do not go out. Or 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end to heaven to the other. So that's a lot. It's very complicated, complex, mysterious, hidden in enigma, wrapped in a mystery, undercloak. It's a lot of things going on here, and I'm not going to pretend that I understand everything that's in here. But what I can say is that some things are not meant to be understood in our time. And I guess what I mean by that is that to whomever Jesus was speaking or the authors were speaking at this time, these things probably made sense to some of them, given the context that they were in. But these things might not make sense to us because we have different worldviews. We see things differently. We have sciences and other things that they didn't have then, that gives us a different worldview than they had then. The worldview that we have now is very different. So when I tend to read these kinds of scriptures, I typically look at the relational dynamics of what the scriptures are saying, and to look for the things that are consistent with relational dynamics back then that can also be relevant now. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. One thing that we can note from these passages is that the way it reads is that it sounded like Jesus was telling the disciples that all these things were going to happen in their time. Now, maybe that's not what Jesus meant, but that's what it sounds like. And if it does sound like that, then many of those things did not happen in their time. The temple, that was taken down sometime in the future, but I think all the disciples were passed away at that point. But I guess what I can say is that a lot of the things that he talked about in terms of signs of his return, they are signs of the temporary. And what Jesus was really about was like eternal life, eternal wisdom, things that endure for everlasting, and not the things of the world that all are passing away. And so I think that when you look at some of the teachings or some of the things he was trying to share, I personally take it as he was, I mean, all my life it's been nation against nation, and wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes. I've never lived in a time where these things weren't happening, and it seems like no one else has either. And so I guess I would go so far as to say that this is something that applies to all times, because the same situations keep repeating themselves. And the invitation of these scriptures is not to look and say like, oh, when is Jesus going to come back in the way that we might imagine, but more so when do we become conscious of Christ in the grand scheme and in the world that we're currently living in. Because if it is like it seems and people have been peopling forever, then to the individual who's studying these scriptures, which also we have to note that there's no proof that people thought this was going to be scriptures. These teachings, no, I don't think people who wrote these back then anticipated us reading them the way that we do now. And that's something that I think many of us have a hard time understanding. We think that the world that we live in is the way that the world, how do you say this? The way that people looked at the world then is the way that we look at it now. We tend to project our worldview onto the past. And I don't think that was the case. I think that they wrote differently, spoke differently, had different understandings based on the context they were in. And so we have to look more deeply into the things that do endure over time, which is how do we deal with one another? How do we relate to one another? How do we relate to the world that we find ourselves in? Who do you show up as in a world where everything is temporary? There's chaos everywhere. People are not loving each other. People are turning against each other. I think it's always been that way. It's still that way. And the question is, how are you going to live into it, especially when you've been offered teachings to show us a better way of living? So that's kind of my take on this particular passage. I live in anticipation of Christ showing up at any time, but not in the conventional sense, but more so in my own consciousness, in my own mind, where the ways of Christ show up. And when I feel tempted at looking at the world and seeing all the despair and all the destruction and all of the chaos and all of the hate and just wanting to give up, I remember that these teachings are inviting me to stay present with God's love and God's reality, no matter what's going on in the world. And I kind of take it as Jesus saying, pay attention to the world. You're going to hear a lot of people faking and being hypocrites and all the things that he's already talked about. And being able to discern that will help us see Christ coming in the clouds, but it'll be the clouds of our mind, that our minds will become clear and we'll see Christ as Christ is. So I know that's not a take that everybody has. Some people probably would be mad that I have this take. But the way I look at it is, if I continue to try to seek Christ in the present moment, then it doesn't matter when Christ comes back, or if Christ comes back in the kind of fantastical form that I was taught. I'd just be like, hey, I was still trying to do the best that I could under those circumstances. And if it turns out that it's more about arriving to a certain place in our own consciousness and being able to live the way of Christ in a world that is kind of off, then, how can we lose? So anyway, that's it. I'm a little tired, but I wanted to make sure I got this video out, and I hope that you got something out of this. Thanks.